big wave surfer, writer, podcast host, and he doesn't state this in any of his bio lines, but I'd call him an activist, not just limited to environmentalism. His first big media splash was the TED Talk that he did in 2011 at the age of 21, explaining why you should move your money out of multinational banks and into local banks, with an analysis on how big banks use your money to invest in projects that actually may be bad for you. He also did an expose on a violent 500-year turf war that's happening in Chile. In one recent article for Surfer Magazine entitled Sundays Are for the Girls, he writes about Barra de la Cruz's designated policy of a weekly surf session for only women and children every Sunday. A couple of years ago, and under the guise of his interview podcast, The Kyle Thiermann Show, Kyle had the idea to interview his dad, and the experience became a flashpoint for Kyle. It altered his preconceived ideas, not only of his father, but also of himself. He then interviewed his mom off air, and also began formally asking questions about parent and adult children's relationship dynamics with behavioralists and experts that he was interviewing on The Kyle Thiermann Show. The deeper he got into it, the deeper value he identified in this simple concept of just interviewing your parents. He started talking about the virtues publicly and then really started honing a guideline with specific questions, approaches, and tactics for how to really foster meaningful conversation. And now he's compiled those questions, added his own experience, and included conversations with the experts. And he's written a book entitled One Last Question Before You Go: Why You Should Interview Your Parents. It is available today, November 18th. You can buy it on Amazon. And I've known Kyle for about a decade now. I've always had an admiration for his work, but this concept specifically resonated with me from the moment that he began discussing it. So I was eager to learn more, and I'm honored to be able to share this conversation with you today. But first, let's acknowledge that Surf Splendor would not be possible without the support of our friends, the Surfrider Foundation, Veyer Watches, and Real Water Sports. The ocean needs more friends, so please consider becoming a member at surfrider.org. The Department of Interior is actually revising a 5-year offshore oil drilling plan, and these are the moments where your voice and the sheer number of voices matter. So you can sign the petitions. You can do it through Surfrider. They will help plead it to Congress for you. Click on the Drilling is Killing banner at surfrider.org to protect the ocean for all. And then Veyer Watches is our timekeeping partner with beautifully made, stylish, and durable timepieces. I have a solar-powered watch from Veyer that actually is powered for 6 months off of just 6 hours of sunlight. No need for a battery, no need to wind it. And then I will save you 15% if you go through our affiliate link, which is VeyerWatches.com/surfsplendor. And then Real Water Sports has just launched their Black Friday sale, starting early, in fact, so you can benefit from up to 80% off, which equals $900 off some of the surfboards. High commodity items, of course, will go first, so don't wait until Black Friday. Go today. Go to realwatersports.com. Check that out and enjoy it. And without further ado, my name is David Scales for Surf Splendor, and I really hope that you enjoy my conversation with newly minted author Kyle Thiermann. Enjoy.
Surf Splendor.
As long as I've known you, I feel like you've kind of been introspective. You're interested in self-improvement. What do you attribute that to? I think a lot of people, especially when I first met you at that young age, are just moving forward and not necessarily looking inward. So what do you attribute it to?
I think that there's just a recognition that life is a lot better when you're continuing to seek outside of yourself. And I find that when I get too into my own self, unhappiness quickly follows. So I think I use it, the kind of forward propulsion of constantly learning, constantly trying to grow, staying curious as an antidote to my own suffering. And I think also just seeing how often, I think from a young age, I saw how often adults slipped into this kind of calcified resentment. it's a really common thing. You know, like I think surfing is the best culture in the world. And I also think we can attest that we know those grumpy old guys that have just completely lost the sparkle in their eye. And it starts to kill you. Like you just see it, you know, people get too centered around themselves, too um, connected to a single identity. I think that's a real big problem for people. And then, you know, that's what leads you to snap when some kid paddles around you, right? Because you're like, this is all I have. This is all I have. This shitty little left. Like, you know, so I consider myself a surfer first and foremost, but I have been very intentional about also seeking other subcultures, other areas to grow. And I just noticed really early on that helped me be happier.
Hmm. Was there a season of suffering prior to that, or do you feel like you were always just wired that way?
I think that on a certain level, I was always wired that way. My mom says that there was an event when I was 13 that she noticed a real fundamental shift in me. I was down in Mexico, mainland Mex, with my dad, my brother, close friend, and we were surfing Tikla, this little left that gets pretty fun down in mainland Mex. We were on the fourth day of the trip, and I got a stomach ache. It's really bad stomach ache, and we thought it was just you know, Turista Montezuma's revenge, food poisoning. Wasn't throwing up, wasn't shitting. We were in these little huts uh, close to the beach, staying in the hotel, and it was just getting worse and worse. And my friend told my dad, he's like, "Hey, I think something's really wrong with Kyle." They took me to a hospital nearby, which was very rundown and local, and the doctor determined that I had ruptured my appendix and I had about 1 day to live. So they said, we can do the surgery right here, but the operating room is, como se dice, no finished. So my dad, you know, he goes white. They drive me to Colima. This is actually a funny little story. Um, I'm, you know, 13, still have no comprehension that I'm 1 day away from death. Just pissed off that my surf trip is over. They put an IV into my arm. The nurse starts to push down. The doctor comes up behind her, runs up behind her, and goes, "No, no, no, not him. Over there." She takes the IV out of my arm, plunges it into the patient next to me. My dad just freaks out, right? They drive me in this ambulance to Colima, which is a big city, a couple hours away. My brother calls my mom, who's in the United States, says, "Hey, Kyle's going under the knife for an emergency appendectomy." And click, his phone dies. Can't call her again for another 5 hours. She's freaking out. They considered putting me on a plane to do the surgery back in the United States, but they determined that I was like very close to death. For people who don't know, appendicitis are relatively common. But what I had done is waited until the sac actually ruptured. So it's a toxic spew leaching all around your stomach, and they need to cut open your stomach with a fairly large incision, pull out your guts, and wash out the inside of you with saline solution. They ended up doing it. They did a great job on my surgery. I flew home, and I was really sick for acutely a couple months, but really about a year. I had stomach problems. I couldn't eat any meat or any hard to digest food. And my mom said that was the first time that she ever noticed that I had to slow down.
Mm.
And that whole year, I think slowly dawned on me that I was like, that I was a close one. That was a really close one. And maybe it's something that I was just born with, but I think that the insight that I came away with from that experience is that life goes fucking fast. And if you want to make something happen, you got to pick up the phone and do it today, because it's really common for the years to just pass you by with things that you thought you wanted to do but never really made happen. So I think that if there's any like skill that has helped me find any success in my life, it's just you do not wait, because you don't know how much longer you have, and it takes a level of immediacy to reach your goals.
Freaky, dude. In all the interviewing and conversations you've had with your dad in recent years, have you asked him about the trauma of that? I mean, I would think as a dad, seeing your kid almost die would affect him too.
I think that I think it affected my mom more than anyone.
Okay.
I remember going home back to Santa Cruz, and her just freaking out, like giving me this hug and just like sobbing gutturally. And I was like, whoa, I've never seen my mom like this. My dad has always been a very laissez-faire. Like he's just, he goes to the flea market every weekend, he buys secondhand trinkets. Like, he just lives life in a very easygoing manner. And I think that doubly freaked my mom out, because she was afraid that he wasn't going to
Yeah.
act, do anything. And, thankfully he did. And I don't mean to make him sound irresponsible or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I've always had a close relationship with my mom. And I think that experience, I mean, I can only imagine like what it's like to have your kid go through that and not be able to do anything. I think it really freaked her out.
Kind of shifting a little bit into your parents and the impetus for the book. I think when we all, growing up, anyways, we all kind of think of our parents as being infallible until a certain point, and it's a different point for each of us. But was there a moment where you realized that your parents weren't?
Yes, the impetus to write this book happened when my mom was she was up in Half Moon Bay hanging out with a friend, helping her reverse out of a parking garage. And she was backing up, not looking where she was going, and the parking garage lever, the thing that lifts up when you pay to leave, fell on her head, and she was driven to the ground, and she broke her hip and femur. My whole life, my mom had always been very competent, cognitively sharp. And I remember I remember hearing about it, seeing her not be able to walk, and being really agitated and angry for the next few weeks. Like it wasn't just immediate, like, oh my God, my mom is, I was like pissed off, and it felt like, whoa, she could go at any time. She's frail and old and in her 70s now. And I don't like, this is a big thing when your parent dies. And it seems like one of those things that most of us don't prepare for adequately, and don't meditate on and think about. And as a result, there's this kind of shattering that happens, and a level of regret that we didn't spend more time with them, ask them better questions about their life, or just feel more complete. One pretty interesting stat is that for most of us, by the time we're 18 years old, we will have spent 90% of our total time with our parents. So that means that 9 out of every 10 days you've ever spent with your parents, or will ever spend, happen before you're 18 years old. Right? So you have this deep connection with them. You don't have your license. They drive you around. They feed you. All that, they are infallible characters, right? And then we go off. Oftentimes we move out of our hometown. We start to only see them on holidays, and we have this kind of ossified old version of who they were, and we really lose any sense of curiosity into who they are now. So yeah, there was an immediacy for me to do this project. And what we remember of our parents are the stories of their lives, right? And they don't need to be profound, they don't need to be life changing, but just nailing a few of those great stories from my parents' lives has been it's a fun process, and I feel good to have it down on tape, it's really easy to do now. You can just do it with your phone, and I can pass that audio down to, my great grandkids, which is just a cool thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. What year did you say this was where that incident happened with your mom?
That happened in, I want to say it was 2021.
Because I feel like, didn't you interview your dad on the podcast before that?
I interviewed my dad on the podcast right around that time. It was during
Okay.
COVID. And that was maybe the initial inciting incident, right? It was
Yeah.
COVID. I wanted to have my dad on the show. He told some fun stories, and there was a bit of a signal boost. I got a lot of emails from people who were like, dude, I want to interview my parents. And I want to hear, I know you've interviewed your parents as well. But it was just this like, oh, whoa, this is a thing that people are kind of interested in doing, but don't really have the tools to accomplish themselves. And then, but I had not really thought, oh, this is a book. I'm going to spend the next 3 years of my life seeking out experts who are, know all about parent-child relationships, and journalists, and, families in prehistory, which is what I ended up doing. It took my mom breaking her hip for me to fully take this project on.
Yeah. Gotcha. Um, the other detail, I'm not sure if this is where it fits in the narrative or the timeline of your story or not, but the other detail is just um, people have fractured relationships with their parents too. You know what I mean? Like the idea of getting along flawlessly with your parents is almost unheard of. And the older you get, probably the more your ideologies separate. They're similar when you're young, but you develop your own later. So I know you have a situation with your mom that definitely felt like a fracturing of that relationship. Can you explain that and explain your comfort or your desire to want to heal it?
Sure. Yeah, the it's very normal for relationships to drift apart without effort. There's a story that was done in the New Yorker in 2024. It was one of the top 10 most uh, read stories of the New Yorker in that year, and it was called No Contact. It was about the family estrangement epidemic. It was written by a journalist named Anna Russell. Like it is an epidemic of parents and children that barely talk to each other or just have shitty relationships. As you say, a lot of that happens from a distance in ideology. I think it's especially bad now because culture has really turned up the dial on identity politics, right? If you're a Republican, media tells you that that should be at the forefront of your identity. If you are a Democrat, that means that you shouldn't have friends who are Republican. If you believe a certain thing, like, and that wasn't always the case, right? In the 1960s, it was you were celebrated as a politician to talk to people on the other side of the aisle. And I think it's been a really bad part of social media, right? That we feel like we can't talk to people who disagree from us. And I actually think that, like, as surfers, that's one of the healthiest things of our culture right now is like, I'm friends with a ton of people who don't agree with me politically, but we both love to get barreled. And like, there's this great thinker named Tristan Harris. He wrote The Social Dilemma, or he made The Social Dilemma. He talks a lot about the issue that social media is having on our psychology. And he once said, I think one of the healthiest things that we could do as a country is just go out and play a soccer game together. Because all of a sudden, when you're playing games together, you're like, holy shit, we're all just humans on this spinning ball hurling through vast vacuum space. And it's crazy that we're so different from each other. So I think that the interview process, and one thing I recommend for people who have a really hard time with their parents, is don't try and get into that hard stuff. Start the interview by asking them about something that they care a great deal about, or a hobby that they love. With my dad, he was a magician growing up. He paid his way through high school doing magic shows in Venice Beach for Hispanic families. And like, I did spend a whole hour just asking him about fucking magic. Like, it was super fun. And it created a kind of like warmth for us. Right. And So that's what I recommend. You know, if there's one thing that you can connect on with your parents, ask them about that, and you're going to have a better time. Going back to your question, but yeah, my mom and I always had a really close relationship. When I was in high school, she became fairly enthusiastic about what I would consider to be a number of conspiracy theories, which, you know, many of which, you know, they might be true. I'm not saying that I'm an expert on all conspiracy theories. Some of them have proved to be true. But I think that there's the way I would describe my issue with the way she tends to think is no matter what event happens, she loves to adopt the most fringe viewpoint on that. Like from an ideological sense, where it's like weird, where it feels like, wait, you are finding a conclusion that you desire and then cherry picking evidence to support that conclusion. There's a word that I learned recently called pareidolia, which is the effort to find patterns within randomness. So it's like this, it's an ideology that makes you believe that disparate global events are highly orchestrated and organized by some perfect puppet master scheme that gives you a way to understand the world. But I don't think it's necessarily a very helpful one, because there's a utility to truth, and it can get people pretty far off and down these rabbit holes that are just based in fantasy. She ended up spending the next 2 decades making conspiracy theory documentaries, basically, and investing huge amounts of her savings into this stuff. And it created a real hard, like, it just made Thanksgivings kind of weird when we would talk about what's happening in the world, because there's no like base reality you can stand on together at that point. You're just like, well, you believe something totally different happened than what I believe. And you know, I talk about one, like the one that I focus on in the book, just because I didn't, the conspiracy theories are not the point of the book. The point is that you can have major disagreements and still have a warm relationship. The way to do that, I believe, is through thoughtful question asking, not by trying to assert your reality onto your parents or someone else. Like, it's amazing how much we love being asked questions, and it's a skill that anyone can learn, and you can kind of step out of this role as child and into the role of journalist. Right? And I think that's a really healthy and fun thing for people to do. The conspiracy that we ended up, you know, that I talk about at great length in the book is this thing called free energy. It's this idea that there are perpetual motion machines that have been repressed by the Illuminati. These machines can power entire cities. I mean, I would love if they existed. That would be freaking great. But, you know, she and her husband were scammed out of great sums of money by what I believe to be con artists. And as you can imagine, like, it's pretty hard for a kid to deal with that, and infuriating. And you want to fucking kill these people that are like, you know, it's a big thing, you know, just elders getting scammed out of savings it's running rampant on the internet right now. And yeah, it was super hard. You know, it's hard to deal with that and figure out how to navigate that. And to really, like, you know, I love and respect my mom. Like, she's a badass. And I think that often, whether it be politics or conspiracy or just like something that you disagree with, you can start to think of your parent as only that.
Yeah.
Right? And one thing that was really fun and useful for me during the interview was to ask her about who she was before she was my mom.
Yeah.
What was Berkeley like in the 1960s when you were out on the streets protesting the Vietnam War? What was it like to, you know, run this homeless teen center when I was 4 years old in Santa Cruz? Like, I never really even asked about that. It all lived in vagary. So I didn't, you know, focus my interview on like, this is what we disagree about, this is why you're wrong. It's like, I want to gain and record these moments from your life that are specific and vivid and help me color in you as a person, which I think can lead to hopefully the insight that, most adults have sooner or later, which is, holy shit, my parent is just a person.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you have a strategy for dealing with something specific. And basically, a lot of what you're saying is you and your parents have different ideology, but it sounds like you were raised with kind of unconditional love and you felt, that your parents loved you. What I've seen with some of my friend group is they don't necessarily have that. So not only is the ideology different, but they're carrying childhood trauma that they still attribute to their parents inflicting upon them. So when it comes to you giving this advice for people on how they should interview their parents, have you addressed that or have you encountered anybody who is carrying that stuff? And do you have any advice for them if, perhaps they're not even talking to their parents right now because of those past traumas?
I interviewed a woman named Dr. Katie Hendricks in the book, who is a transpersonal psychologist. She's written a bunch of books on parent child relationships. And she told this story in the interview where she said she was home for the holidays one year and her mom was standing in the kitchen and just blurted out, we never really wanted you. And she was like, wow, I've always suspected that, but to have the truth of my experience be confirmed is just another level of, all right, that's the situation that we're living in. And I asked her, I was like, for people who suspect that their parents never actually wanted them, like, should you bring that up in the interview? And she said, no, don't do that. That's another uh, that's another thing potentially with a therapist in the room. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not, I don't have advice for people when it comes to really getting into that next level of quote unquote healing.
Yeah.
The interview is meant to crack open the door. And it's important for anyone who interviews their parents to do it not from a sense of being a child, but from being a sense of a journalist. Like, you don't want to go into that interview and carry your own shit with you or even necessarily respond to what it is that they're saying. The goal is for you to sit down with a bunch of good questions and let them talk. One of the differences between being an interviewer and being in a regular conversation is you don't even need to respond to someone after they speak, right? If it starts to go off the rails, just guide it back to a new subject, get more stories out of them, and you can be on your way. Generally, though, after the experience, like, it can open up a door to maybe more conversations. Maybe it is a therapy session. Maybe it's a second interview where you go deeper. But yeah, I think that it's the starting line, not the finish line.
I mean, I again wouldn't give anybody advice as a not a psychologist either. So I wouldn't give advice for how to deal with their trauma, but I do see that there would be the benefits that you're talking about of doing the interview would uh, be true whether or not you're carrying that childhood trauma or not. And one of the benefits would be, um, like you said, understanding that your parent is also a fallible human. And so having a conversation with them and addressing it without any emotional weight attached to it and hearing their stories about, early loves of their life or whatever it was, early ambitions, early failures, stuff like that would just humanize them in a way that I think you might be able to understand why they had those foibles
Mm-hmm.
raising and that could help patch over or heal over that trauma or just appreciate them more as a human if you're not carrying that trauma.
Yeah, I think that here, I'm going to close that. I hear something in the
Yeah, take your
background. Just
time.
one second.
Yeah, yeah.
Growing up, most of us are not taught to ask questions. It's not a skill that we're tested on. We're tested on having the right answers. When we get jobs, it's typically the person who is most definitive making the statement that gets promoted. It's not the person who gets the award for asking the best question, right? So there's no reason that most of us should be good question askers, but it's an incredibly powerful skill that opens up worlds, right? Any success that I've had in my career as a journalist has come from asking the right question. When you start any new story, it's about posing a hypothesis and then calling a bunch of people up, asking questions to gather material for that story. So the journalistic endeavor really is about learning how to craft certain questions, which you're not blowing smoke, you're very good at, because you point to a level of specificity that gives me an opportunity to answer the question with a moment or a story. One thing I recommend when people are doing the interviews with their parents is get them to send you photos beforehand. If they have photographs from their life, from their teens, from their childhood, get those photos beforehand and then ask questions about specific photos. That's going to give them an opportunity to expound on a story, right? And that, again, it's stories. Stories are what we remember. And then once you get into that specific moment, ask them about how they feel about this. One guy I interviewed for the book is named Charles Duhigg. He wrote the book The Power of Habit, and then later this book called Super Communicators. And he has this concept called deep questions. So you don't just ask about the facts of your parents' life, ask how they feel about their lives. So it's not like just, hey, when did you take your surf trip to Indo? It's like, what made you want to go? And then all of a sudden you are starting to understand their decision-making process, and that can lead to better interviews.
Yeah. Through interviewing your parents, did they receive any benefit from being interviewed by you or newfound appreciation in the relationship?
My dad sent me a really nice email after I interviewed him where he said, thanks for sitting down with me. It made me feel like what I had to say was important. And I was like, shit, man, that's really cool. I think a lot of older folks in our society don't feel like any of their experience matters because
Right.
they're not young and plastified and hot on Instagram. So they're not the vehicles who can deliver this kind of wisdom. One thing that's cool about your podcast and about surfing culture in general is I think we have more of a reverence for elders in our culture, right? Who were, Greg Knoll and the old big wave guys can still, or really anyone, right? Like in our culture, we have a reverence and respect for history and for those early travelers that I wish more of the culture generally had a value for. But yeah, I mean, it's the punchline to this whole thing is that it can be more of a gift for your parents than it can be for you. Right? It feels pretty darn good to have someone sit down and ask you thoughtful questions about your life for an hour. It makes you feel like, there's something interesting that you might have to say. And I also encourage people to use the term parent very liberally. So this doesn't need to be your biological parent. It can be an older friend, a mentor, someone who taught you something. You can, throughout most of human history, we didn't really treat biological parents in a nuclear family sense, right? Most hunter-gatherer tribes would say, oh, that I have 4 dads, I have 3 moms. Like they really did not, because they didn't understand that a fetus is born from just one man and one woman. Like we literally thought that anyone who has sex with the woman, and many of these tribes were polyamorous, were the father, right? They believed that you had to, that if you wanted to have a funny, smart, strong kid, you had to have sex with the strong guy, the funny guy, and the smart guy, and then all those parents, quote unquote, took responsibility for the child. In Hawaii, for example, King Kamehameha the First was said to have had 2 fathers. Right? So whoever it is that you would like to do this with, like it doesn't need to be biological parents. It can really be anyone.
Um, has the dynamic in your relationship with your parents shifted since this project started?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, my I think that my mom said, and it's a quote that it's on the back of the book, which is, she said, I always used to say that if I could have any superpower, it would be to know what people really thought of me. And when Kyle wrote this book, I inadvertently got my wish. Like it's hard to the hardest thing about writing a book for me is just being fucking honest. It's so often in conversation, like we just want to be nice, you know? We're not saying what we really think. We're not saying all of our anger and all of our resentment and all of our hopes and like, but that's the point of books, right? Is to help people feel a little more connected. Like, hey, I'm not alone in this, right? So I wanted to write it first, and the first draft of the book was pretty like glib and like just funny, beep boppy. Hey, interview your parents, and then it was actually through working with Steve Hawk, who some people will be familiar with, the former editor of Surfer Magazine and just A+ editor, as well as his wife Pam Higgins, who was the editor at LA Times for a number of years. They were like, you seem a little, there might be some anger that you're not letting into this. Yeah, I think you should write that down. And it took me, okay, I'm going to do it. And then I wrote a really angry draft about feeling like I lost my mom and my stepdad to conspiracy theories. And then I wrote another draft, which just, it felt a bit more balanced. But the thing the book gave me was a an ability to get all that shit out.
Yeah.
And I think that did help change the tone with my mom afterwards. Like I literally just had a 2-hour Zoom call with my stepdad who just read the book, and we talked it out. Like, I lean in pretty hard to him in certain sections of the book, like with anger, and we were talking about things he believes to be true about the world, things that hurt him about the book, areas that he felt I did really well. And I was able to just be like, it was weird. It was like, wow, it's out of me now. Like, it's a weird thing what any kind of art project can do to an emotional charge. Like it literally, I'm like, yeah, like they believe some shit that I don't believe, and I still fucking love them. This is fun. That's really cool, So it's cliche to say this about art, but like it really can leave you when you turn it into art, when you talk it out. And I think that's the power of the interview, and I think I also got a chance, in writing the book to really understand that, or I guess, like, how do I put this? When you're writing any piece, you're turning real people into characters. And sometimes people are really good characters to write, and sometimes they fall a little flat. My parents are great characters to write. Like, their eccentricities and weirdness and even stuff that was really hard for me growing up turned into great material for the book. So you start to look at, like, I started to look at everything that we had done, an interview that fails gloriously that I did with my stepdad. All of a sudden I came back and I'm like, whoa, that's a damn good chapter right there. Like, so it shifts your orientation towards bad things, like turning it into a story with good characters. And that, I think, really helped me lighten up around my parents.
Yeah. Catharsis.
Yeah.
Through the process. So ultimately, are your parents happy with the book? And are they proud of you? Or have they gotten to that
we don't
point
talk
yet?
anymore. No, yeah, they are. They are, and it says a lot about who they are.
Okay, good.
I gotta say that. It says a lot about having a lot of maturity.
Yeah.
I was in Ireland not too long ago for a friend's wedding. I had mailed out early copies of the book to my mom, my stepdad, my dad, my whole family, right? It's just like, oh my God, when is this text gonna come in? Right. And they all sent really nice, thoughtful text messages and just said, "Hey, I'm really proud of you for doing this. I think it's well written, and hopefully it can help other people who want to interview their own parents." And that just says so much about who they are
Yeah.
on a basic level.
Good. Glad to hear that. And yeah, there is kind of a grander picture here. And I think it is ultimately the result of it will be more communication and deeper communication between children and parents. And so that's a net positive. The other thing that I think about, or I've been thinking about in my adult life, anyways, and I don't know if I've really ever shared it, is just like generally parents want better for their kids than they wanted for themselves. And I know my parents thrived and did better than their parents did, and all the way down the line. And then I was the first one to graduate college in my family, and it was because of that exact thing, you know. And but as a result of graduating college, I had a lot more opportunities to do what I want to do professionally. Um, I had a lot more opportunities to date for love rather than for anything else. And I, what I might have viewed as my parents' maybe narrow mindedness when I was growing through adolescence in my 20s, even, I've now kind of come to the perspective of, well, I have a broader mindedness because of these things that they gifted me with. And it's almost incumbent upon me as an adult to now tap them on the head and show them the vision, you know, just be like,
Mm,
hey, I know you guys didn't get to travel the world until I was older and you gifted me with going to Europe, let's say. And so now I have an appreciation for food and wine and art. So when you
mm,
come over, we're going to drink good wine, we're going to have a fancy meal. And I know
mm,
maybe my parents weren't super discerning about food or whatever previously, and maybe they still aren't. But I'm just going to do that because it's my gift to give to you, you know? Or if you have a dad who is emotionally not super effusive, you know, and it's like, well, guess what? You taught me to be effusive. So here, come and get a hug. I love you.
mm.
That kind of stuff, you know? So it's easy to feel the resentment for the ways that they did have shortcomings. But if you can kind of shift past that and realize that you're gifted this life because of them, and you now have the opportunity to give it back to them and teach them the things that you learned along the way, I think that can be another back half of life where you reap the benefits and have a totally different dynamic with your parents.
Dudes talking about emotions is a fairly new advent in human history.
True.
It like, and a few people back, we were on wagons farming, unable to read. Like, it's a fairly new thing that, and culture is changing so fast, right? So to come back and really meditate on what it was like 50 years ago to grow up, how was America different? How was society and culture different? What did you grow up into? Can give way to a lot of that empathy that you're talking about and kind of gently nudge them. Hey, these are some things that I have experienced now that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
My dad started microdosing recently. Like, he lives in
Be,
Santa
be,
Cruz, and there's this church, I think it's called the Church of Holy Trinity, which under religious law allows them to sell psychedelic mushrooms and LSD. And my dad, it was, the podcasting revolution, right? Like, so many people I've had on my show are psychedelic explorers. I've been talking about this, and he was always kind of open to it, but then uh, Jim Fadiman, who's a guy who wrote the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide and then just recently came out with a new one on microdosing, did a talk at a Santa Cruz bookstore. And my dad, he texted me, he's like, "Hey, I started microdosing recently. It's so fun." And when I went home last time, he asked that I pick him up a new batch of mushrooms. It was fun. I like gave him the mushrooms. We took a couple caps together, and he started talking about things that he hadn't talked about ever before. I don't know if you experienced this with your parents, but like, it can sometimes feel like a broken record where they're like going back on the same things again and again. And to be able to nudge him into this little bit of newness was really fun. And the metaphor that I think is apt for interviewing your parents is it can feel like a psychedelic trip
Mm.
where you are putting on these you are taking a substance that allows you to fundamentally shift the way you see them and yourself, right? And to your point, really thinking about what the what it was like for your parents when they were growing up, what sacrifices they had to make so that you could go take trips to Europe, and have a career that's more in line with something that you're passionate about. Like, you know, the questions can open up the door to that perspective, and you just have an easier time after the fact.
Well, I think another common denominator there is if you're holding resentment about the way that your parents had shortcomings and raised you, it's your ego that's preventing you from really just getting over it, and being able to have that connection. And one of the benefits of the psychedelic thing is kind of that erosion of the ego and being able to see through it.
Great point. Great point. Yeah.
I want to hear more about your personal experience with the psychedelics. Do you, because it has been an ongoing theme in the podcast, but do you remember your initial curiosity or your openness to it initially? Was there a blockade previously?
I think Joe Rogan probably made me open to it. Like so many of us, he was the first podcast that I listened to when I was in my early 20s. I mean, I remember listening to like episode 19 of his podcast, and he was talking with some comedian, probably Duncan Trussell, about taking psychedelics. Uh, and that it really hit our entire friend group all at once. The generation before me growing up in Santa Cruz, it was like punk rock music, meth, coke, and like hard drugs. And to some extent, that still uh, dripped down into my generation. But I think that my crew, who I was growing up with, got way more curious about things like psychedelics and ecstasy as drugs that could be both, mind expanding and not necessarily so addictive and negative. So it was pretty cool. Like, and I think that the podcasting revolution had a really big role in that. But I was open to it from, from when I was in my 20s, and uh, I mean, I got a lot of benefit out of it. Going to Burning Man and, taking mushrooms, taking acid. I've done a number of ayahuasca experiences that I found to be helpful. I think that for other people who I've spoken to, it's been life-changingly profound. People who have really gotten over things. I did an interview with John Rose, who talked about using MDMA to get over post-traumatic stress disorder from a lot of the really intense situations he's been in overseas in disaster zones. So I can't say that psychedelics have been life-changing for me in that kind of like before after way, but I think that if there's any insight I've gained from it, it's that it's a reminder that the way you are seeing the world is really just one option,
Yeah.
and there are many others out there. These days, I don't take psychedelics a ton. I find a real value in just having a clear mind and like good habits. I think it's the Alan Watts quote, when you get the message, hang up the phone. So I do it less now, but I think that for people who have been through trauma, especially people who are older, I think that psychedelics probably have the greatest benefit for people in their 70s and 80s. People who are on their deathbed, there's now a huge hospice movement where people will have psychedelic experiences as they're transitioning out of life. I think that there's an incredible value in that, and I'm happy that it's become more mainstream.
I mean, it seems like there's medicinal benefit, right? So maybe not ideal to use recreationally, or maybe you enter recreationally, but you do recognize those medicinal benefits. And if you can properly diagnose and properly treat and properly measure the dosage, then it seems to have tremendous effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you experience any downsides from your personal usage or cautionary tales?
Yeah, I think that the I've had a number of frightening experiences where I felt like the chassis was getting pretty loose, so to speak. You know, you're at at some like a Diplo concert and you took way too many mushrooms and all of a sudden you feel like your feet are no longer connected to the ground and it's like, ooh, this is not necessarily fun anymore. I think some people listening might know what I'm talking about. But the um thing that I would say about, you know, your pre-flight checklist of psychedelics is that it has a huge amount to do with your mindset and the setting that you're going into it with. So, if you are considering psychedelics, I would recommend first learning how to meditate. I use the Sam Harris Waking Up app. It's been super helpful for me. I just click it on for 10 minutes a day and the skill of drawing your thoughts back to where you want them to go and not letting them just spin out in chaos is real helpful when you are going deep on a mushroom or ayahuasca trip. So I think that meditation is kind of a prerequisite to psychedelics. And then the setting that you're going to do them in it really has an effect on what you're going to get out of it. You know, MDMA as an example is known as a party drug, but it was developed for family therapy. If you take, you know, I've done MDMA dozens of times, but the times that I've gotten really the most benefit out of it is when I have a night at home and take it with my fiance, put on some music, cheese and crackers, like massage oil, hanging out, and you will it what's good about those kinds of experiences is that it allows you to really drop in and settle into the feelings that MDMA can give. And that's my favorite drug. What's happening in your brain when you're taking MDMA is it's essentially a huge flood of oxytocin, and it really ramps up activity in your hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, and turns down activity in your amygdala, which is like the fear response activity, a fear response center of the brain, which is why it's so useful for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. They can actively go back to the traumatic experience and reshape that thought with more of the love drug in them. You don't get to do that when you're at a party. Like when you're at a party, it's a much more external experience. A lot of the psychedelic luminaries of the 60s and 70s would always say, like, you know, take psychedelics in nature, take them with one or two people who you trust, and if you're really looking to get the most out of it. Now, sometimes you just want to go party and have a fun time. Nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to really hoping that you can trying to shift some things, I think turning down the external stimuli is how you can get the most benefit out of it.
Good advice. Um, in the book, you talk about your mom running into Kelly Slater at an ayahuasca retreat. Any concern about outing Kelly as a ayahuasca user?
Hey, he did a video on it that's up on the website down at this ayahuasca spot. So if he didn't want to, if he didn't
Okay.
want to talk about it, he shouldn't have done that. But I also think that uh, ayahuasca is at a point in culture where, like, I mean, let's talk about like what he or anyone. And Kelly, if you're listening, I'm sorry if I didn't check with you first. I thought it'd be totally okay, and it's a damn good joke in the book. So but like just the idea that we still have this blanket term drugs for all these substances. You know, ayahuasca is a vine that grows all around the world and it's brewed and can give way to these remarkably introspective experiences, right? Coffee is also a drug that we don't tend to classify as a drug, but if you take too much, like goddamn, you're going to feel high, you're going to feel side effects. Um, Antidepressants, heroin, cocaine, like all of these are every culture throughout history has really taken mind altering substances to experience new realms. And I think that it's important for us to like drug is just the wrong word, I think, for what it is that we're talking about. And man, I mean, I've talked to plenty of pro surfers who talk about having an ayahuasca experience and saying that it really helped them get into a new stage of life.
Totally.
Yeah.
Um, a- in addition to all the kind of benefits or pitfalls that we already talked about, um, I interviewed years ago Salema Masakela, and he had just come off of a journey, and he was talking about the spiritually connecting with past generations while on the trip, and not in a way that was like it was as real as anything to him, like having conversations with predecessor people who had lived before him, previous generations of his family and all that kind of stuff, and how meaningful that was. And I thought that was a pretty
Dude,
eye-opening thing.
dude, I've never told this story and it didn't go in the book. You're just making me think of it now. I had a grandfather who died years before I was born. My mom's dad, his name was Richard. Don't think about Richard all that often, right? A grandfather who you never met. I was down in Costa Rica in an ayahuasca ceremony, and all that came up was this dude fucking Richard for like hours and hours. And you're just like, why am I thinking about this dude Richard? But not even like, oh, I'm thinking about him. Like he is right there talking to you. And it's a strange phenomenon that people talk about, like Salema, like your ancestors show up to the party for whatever reason. And yeah, the idea that you're connected and rooted to something deeper than just your Instagram following is, I think, a healthy perspective to hold. And we used to pass down stories from our ancestors around the campfire. It's one of the oldest forms of storytelling is right from grandfather to father, mother. We passing down these stories, and in Western culture, I think we've really severed that um, connection to the people who came before us, and it's a helpful and grounding thought to have. You
Yeah.
know, I think that it's useful to look back and think about how you're just one of so many who came before you.
Yeah. I mean, using your book as a jumping off point for this greater conversation about communication as a whole. And I knew you'd be a good guy to have the conversation about communication with, but the more kind of uh, BS I add onto my life, just the day-to-day responsibilities and the obligations and all that, really prevent effective communication, and it narrows the aperture of the style of communication that I do. And if I have more time, or let's say even boredom in my life, the aperture starts to open. And then when I understand the benefit of the medicinal kind of usage and all that kind of stuff, the aperture opens even further. And you really start to realize how little you actually know and how little information you're operating under, acting as if it's whole truth. So, have you listened to the podcast? It's called the Telepathy Tapes.
I haven't, but everyone who is I've ever talked to has told me I need to go listen to
So
this.
you're familiar with the
I'm
concept?
familiar with it. Yeah, The Hill. I know about
I'll,
The Hill.
I'll explain it for people who don't know of it, but it's a podcast. Starts kind of with this Harvard neurologist, neuroscientist, who's studying nonverbal kids with autism. They're not all kids, but they're all nonverbal autism. I think the oldest one's probably in her late teens or something. Um, And ultimately, what the parents identified and what she's studying is that they're communicating telepathically, or what we might call telepathically. The more research that's been done and the more the show goes on, they kind of explain it's a shared consciousness more than it
Mm,
is telepathy. And they're not reading everybody's minds. They're not able to read strangers' minds, but they're communicating telepathically, quote unquote, with either the closest person or the closest people to them. So a mother, a father, maybe the teachers, babysitter, that sort of thing, and friends, nonverbal autistic friends. They're also able to communicate with. And the science is undeniable. Like the actual studies that they do, you listen to, and they're undeniable. There's no way to cheat or to fake the telepathy. Um, they'll do experiments where they're not even in the same zip code and these people are
so
communicating with one
crazy.
another. It's insane. But it opens up again the aperture for understanding what communication is, or what is limiting our view of the communication. And just to kind of explain further for anybody who thinks it sounds wacky, um, there is kind of this idea of that shared consciousness as being kind of a stream of information that's maybe flowing right over our heads, that has math, it has language, it has music, all these different things. And different people are able to tap into it based on their own kind of inclinations or talents, or also based on their own limitations. They're not able to tap into certain things. And you'll hear stories we know of where somebody maybe got hit in the head at some point, and all of a sudden they know a different language or they know how to play piano. And what
They
that
know how to do a cut pack. I'm like, got hit in the head, and all of a sudden I can do a proper roundhouse. How did this happen?
I mean, I remember this from an episode of Popeye when I was a kid, where somebody was walking and a plant fell off a window and hit him in the head, and all of a sudden he had, I forget what, some sort of talent. He could play guitar.
Yeah, you can play Beethoven or something. Yeah.
And then late in the episode, gets hit in the head again and he forgets.
Yeah.
But the idea of being able to, whatever's preventing you from tapping into that stream of consciousness,
Yeah.
ego reduction, whatever trauma you had, like stripping that stuff away. But the first step is just being open to the idea of it, you
Mm.
know? And for whatever reason that hasn't been revealed yet, non-verbal kids with or people with autism have an ability to tap into something that you and I aren't tapped into. So, anyways, it's fascinating, and I think it's the message to deliver here is just like open-mindedness. Like,
Yeah. Open-mindedness, and to underscore something that you just said, boredom. Like this, in the process of doing the interviews, in the process of writing this book, there were periods of time where I wasn't close to my phone. Like I wasn't answering the text message immediately. I wasn't just context shifting in this frenetic hum of what's next. Okay, someone did, and I think the a reason why we don't do this kind of stuff, this deeper work that you're talking about, whether it's, oh, I'm going to sit down with my parents for a couple hours, oh, I'm going to really step back and think about my life in a greater context, is because we are always making ourselves busy. Like, thank God phones don't come out into the lineup, but how many of you out there have had a good idea when you're surfing? Because you're just opening the aperture for yourself for a couple hours to
totally.
think a bit more slowly. And that's one reason why I love doing this podcasting. It's any areas that I can unencumber myself to be a bit slower really pay dividends. And it's a fairly new advent, right, in human history, that we are never bored, that we can just constantly go to our phones, go, and we get addicted to that little dopamine hit. But what you sacrifice are these big projects that you really have the potential to accomplish, but it takes big, um, uninterrupted blocks of time for you to tap into that next level. Yeah, and I'm totally open to something like the telepathy tapes. I am, I think that anyone who does psychedelics can attribute that there's a lot more that we don't fully understand and that science can't explain. One reason why I've committed to becoming a writer is because I feel like it every so often taps me into that space where time disappears and an idea really feels like it shows up from somewhere outside of my brain.
Totally.
Like, and that I'm going for that feeling. That and so the desire to write the book, the commitment to like go in on this next level, like it really was after a while it started to feel like an addiction, right?
Yeah.
Where I have a regular job with Slack and with emails and all this stuff, but for a couple hours every morning I would wake up, I'd keep the internet off and I would just write. Maybe I would get out 10 words, maybe I'd get out a couple thousand. But I think that, my mom said it to me. You asked earlier, like, did the book change your relationship with your parents? I think that on some level, just teaching myself how to slow down and do enough sessions that were really uninterrupted helped me grow up a little bit more. Like maybe the book wouldn't even have needed to be about my parents and the relationship would have changed just because I was
Maybe.
spending time
Good
doing
question.
doing this thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I kind of adjacent to that, or maybe along those lines. I've got a theory that this whole like culture of optimization with a lot of the podcasters who you already referenced, I see as being not the fastest way to growth, self-development, and efficiency. Um, because I feel like it is too much of activity all the time, trying to, do the best version of. And I talk about the fatty middle is actually the healthy point
Fuck
where
yeah. I
it's
don't know
kind
what this is, but I'm already so on board. I'm in.
it's like, look, I don't need to do push-ups all day long.
Hmm.
I do a certain amount, but then, I'm going to lounge. I'm going to do something that is actually detrimental to my health even, because it's the fatty middle where it is the boredom maybe. I don't want to talk about like fully detrimental, but there is something about like the fat on the steak with the meat, with the lean meat makes it taste better. It makes me happier. All of a sudden, me being happier allows me to feel new things, express new things. And so it comes with a certain amount of cost, but a net benefit.
You got to leave a little room for the wine to breathe, man. There's a guy named Derek Sivers who I'm just a huge fan of. He's written a number of books. They're these little thin books that is talk about the human experience. And in one book, he references this story of living in Santa Monica, and every day he would bike the Santa Monica bike path, which goes from Will Rogers all the way down to, I believe, El Segundo. It's a really nice bike path. And every day he would time himself, try and go as fast as he possibly could on this bike path, just redlining it the whole way. And every time he could barely, it got to like, it's an hour and 10 minutes is how he would always finish the ride. And then one day he decided, I'm actually not going to try and go my fastest. I'm just going to cruise. I'm going to go at a good pace, good speedy pace, but I'm not going to just be redlining it. Gets to the end, it's an hour and 8 minutes. He lost 2 minutes of time for actually enjoying the ride. And man, yeah, the benefit of leaving a little breathing room
Yeah.
and giving yourself time to sit and do nothing and be quote unquote counterproductive, it just leads you to a more, I think, a more interesting existence. If you're constantly trying to optimize, pretty quickly, like those people lose their humor, they lose the willingness just to go try something because, and often, man, I think that it can actually be like detrimental if you get so psyched on supplements that and so prescriptive about your day, like people just don't want to be around you anymore. You see those
Totally
people,
agree.
like, dude, you just suck. Cool, you've optimized your life down to the second, but you don't have any more friends or humor in your life. And I think that that's again like one of the things that keeps me surfing and my lifelong commitment to this sport and culture and lifestyle is that it's not just about being the best surfer on a high performance shortboard. Like, yeah, sometimes that's fun to do. And growing up, I really, I spent a long time just riding shortboards, and like trying really fucking hard to surf every wave the best we possibly could. And, uh, we all come to it, but that we all one day realize how fucking fun a mid length is. And like now I'm like, man, it's so great that there's various instruments that we can play in this band. Uh, don't always need to try so hard.
Yeah, totally agree. Um, I'm curious. I mean, we've kind of already covered this in general, but maybe you want to speak to it specifically of when you look back at 9 years of podcasting at this point, how has it shaped your life? Can you imagine how different your life would be if you weren't having these conversations?
Dude, I know. I was excited to have this conversation with you too, because I feel like there's so many people that start podcasts
Oh,
and then
yeah.
quit after like a dozen episodes and it becomes this elephant graveyard. And hey, like no shame. I think you should do whatever feels right for you. But you and I are people who like clearly would keep doing this if no one was listening. Like we're just gonna be like old and gray, like talking to no one, just like I can't stop. This is so fun. So I really see you as one of those people who does it for yourself. I often say that starting my podcast was the best decision I ever made in my life. And the reason for that is that it's just continuously pushed me to reach out to people who I wouldn't reach out to.
Yeah.
When you get older, when you get a job, it's very common to stop making friends, stop making new friends, stop meeting new people in adjacent worlds. You're just spending 99% of your time with, maybe it's your partner and then your coworkers, a couple friends on the side. Podcasting forces you to develop a habit to just send that fucking email. I'm sure you've had this a million times where you're like, they're probably not going to respond. And then they do, and they turn out to be a really cool person. And if you do a good one, you can actually form I have some of my best friends now
Yeah.
are people who are guests on the podcast. Uh, so it's just made my life infinitely bigger. Uh, and for me, I started the show because I was getting into surfing Mavs, and I was like, oh wow, I'm like friends with a lot of these guys that are some of the best big wave surfers in the world, and like maybe I can interview them, and that'd be an interesting idea for a podcast. That was the premise. In one of the earliest episodes, I had Sean Dollar on after he had his traumatic brain injury. And I was like, whoa, he's a really good interview. I don't know if you've had him on, but like he just told these stories that were like, whoa, this is a crazy cool medium to get to record and explore. But then very quickly I realized like, I don't only need to interview surfers. I can also interview psychedelic explorers and sex therapists and environmentalists and hunters. And like, it was through that I've had a chance to just continuously learn more about other worlds. And I think that for my psychology, it is good because it just keeps getting me out of my own head. Like
Mhm.
when I'm doing a podcast, particularly when I'm hosting one, I don't need to think about myself. I can just zone in like you're doing right now and like think about the other person. And you start to develop this skill set as you have where you're tuning into what is going to deepen this person's understanding of themselves, what's going to get them to expound on, like, you just learn about fucking humans. I don't know how else to say it. Like, podcasting is a skill to just learn about the human experience, and you can draw on that for your own life. Like, it's made me a better writer for sure. Like, now that I can
Totally.
write about a character, so I'm like, well, there's all these different aspects to them. And yeah, it's a good skill that everyone should do at least once.
Yeah. I've received a lot of the same benefit you're talking about, but I've been thinking lately, like I'll spend publishing episodes every week. So I'll spend a week doing a deep dive into Liam McNamara, before I interviewing him. But then I publish and I move on. And it's like
Yeah.
now I'm doing a deep dive into something else. And I'm like, when I look back at time, I have all the benefit or the back at the last over 12 years of doing it, I have the same benefit you're talking about. But I'm like, man, I want the next 12 years to be able to like let it soak in a little bit more. It's
Totally.
it's hard to let
Yeah.
it soak in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think that the downsides to podcasts that I've felt is that, like, yeah, I'm not actually necessarily absorbing the information that the guests are telling me. And it takes a bit more of like, oh, I need to listen back a couple times.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what writing does for me. Is
Yeah.
oftentimes I'll do a video call with someone, I'll record it, and then I'm pulling out the most interesting parts of it and writing about it. Then it's in there. Then I'm actually
Totally.
gaining that information. But yeah, we're informational grazers, and I don't know that podcasting has helped. I really, I mean, I'd be fucking brilliant if I could absorb all the information from all the guests that I've had. But yeah, it takes, one thing I say about when interviewing your parents, afterward, listen back to the recording and write about it. Like, write how you felt about the experience. What surprised you? What did you not know about? How do you feel about it now? Because then all of that new learning is going to get into you. Going back to psychedelics, one thing that psychedelic therapists recommend is to, we talked about setting, mindset, the setting you're in, but the third step is integration. So if you have an insight, you need to write it down. You need to integrate that into your brain, talk about it. And I think that that's one thing that the optimizers really don't talk about, right? They think you can just like chomp your way through information without giving it a little bit of time to steep and set in. So how do you think that you're going to how do you think that you're going to integrate more information in these next 12 years?
I haven't thought about it, that actual action steps, but you're right in that writing for me also helps me commit it to memory in a much more meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a writing project. I guess I've never concerned myself too much about it not soaking in because I know I have this archive of content I can always go back and listen to and regurgitate maybe in a writing format or something. So it's always there for me to get back into. It's just I want to be able to appreciate it more in real time while I'm doing it. But I think just by virtue of um, where I'm at, like it used to take a lot of work to do what I do now, and it now takes
Mm.
less work because I have the rhythm down. So I think I will be able just to spend less time in the pre-production and the actual production of it, and then maybe let it soak in more, and then maybe even write. There's other mediums that I feel like we've plateaued in listenership a certain time ago in terms of there's only so many people that care about surfing and listen to podcasts. They know I
Mm.
exist, they listen. But there's a lot more people that would like this information that don't know it exists. So how do we access them? And so
Mm.
I think there's other mediums that I can take what the work that I'm currently doing and disseminate it out to those other mediums. And I
Yep.
think that would allow me to then spend more time with the content and let it soak in more.
I in the process of writing the book, was talking to a friend of mine, really great writer. His name's Adam Skolnick. He's a diver. Do you know who Adam is?
I only know of him. I don't know.
Yeah, so he ghost wrote. He's written a number of books himself. He's coming out with a new novel called American Tiger in December, but he ghost wrote David Goggins' book, which
That's
was
right.
7 million copies sold. And if anyone has listened to the audiobook version of that, it's called Can't Hurt Me. Between each chapter, it's an interview between he and David. So the chapter ends, and it's like, man, David Goggins, like that was crazy last chapter. Okay, let's talk about. And then David's like, man, well, what we didn't include in there was da 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 da. And it, for me as an audiobook listener, made it way better because
Hmm.
it breaks up the cadence of listening to someone read lines, and then you get out into a more extemporaneous conversation. And he said, dude, for your book, you should, he's like, have you recorded any of the interviews? And I was like, I record all the interviews. And a lot of the people who are various experts in chapters, whether it be Dr. Katie Hendricks or Dr. Christopher Ryan, who talks about parenting in prehistory, or Charles Duhigg from The Power of Habit. I had recorded all these interviews for my podcast. And he's like, dude, you should take out little 5-minute snippets and put them between the chapters. And it was a last minute decision. We did it like literally like the day before I was recording the audiobook, and it's sick. Like to listen back to my chapter read, and then it goes, all right, and here's Rachel Anticoli, the hospice nurse who I was just talking to, and then it's a little 5-minute snippet of her talking. Like you might want to think about that for your own writing, because we now have thousands of hours of highly recorded content that you can repurpose into
Yeah,
other mediums. So yeah, I mean, if you write a book, you might want to think about doing that for your audiobook.
that's super smart. Makes it much more dynamic. Um, what's your greatest career ambition? You seem like an ambitious guy.
I still haven't gotten a 10-second barrel, man. I'm still waiting for that one. Yeah,
Book some time at Surf Ranch.
I know. Yeah, if Kelly will talk to me. Yeah, the motherfucker told him I did ayahuasca. It's bastards.
He
Gets his
did that.
he,
He
he
did
get
that.
he
He
gets his
did that.
11 world championships taken away because they're like, he was using drugs. I'm like, oh my god, what have I done?
He did that testimonial video that you talked about, but I feel like he never promoted it, and he certainly hasn't talked about any. I've never seen him talk about anything like that since.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he should, because everyone else is doing it. Aaron Rodgers is doing it. Aaron Rodgers busted open the door for everyone. Uh, my my career ambitions have a lot to do with writing books. This, for me, I wasn't sure if I was gonna like writing books. I wasn't sure, like, this is, I had friends who had done it, and it's a really challenging experience because you're just holding a single idea for years and years and years. Like, going back to this idea of like reflecting, it's like the amount of times that I thought the book was fucking done and wanted it to be done. And you're like, okay, I just gotta keep cracking away at it, a couple hours a day. And then all of a sudden you have a new insight. And you're like, oh my God, I should interview this person. Oh my God, this chapter is missing this thing. I found to be addicting in the end. It's sick to come away with this thing at the end where you're like, whoa, this feels like a body of work.
Yeah.
Uh, and the book, it has a lot of surfing in it, but uh, it's fundamentally not a surfing book. I've always felt like one thing that makes our sport so unique is that it is a vehicle into a lot of other adjacent subjects. The places that surfing takes us are maybe underreported in media. The stories of some surfers and what else they have going on in their lives are, in my eyes, like these are some of the most interesting stories in the world. So I think that you could spend a career on writing books about surfing plus interesting thing. I, and I could see the next one that I do being more focused on surfing, but surfing plus, whatever, psychedelics, surfing plus this or that. Um, but yeah, I think that I found my thing as a writer. Uh, and I just want to stay close to that source, you know? And it's something that like, like growing up as a surfer, I was decent. I was good. I was hanging with the crew, but like I don't think anyone ever sat me down and was like, Kyle, you are an amazingly talented surfer. Like you should, my friend Nat Young, fucking people sat him down and were like, bro, you got something real special. And that for me, writing was always that thing. Like that I was kind of good at it from the beginning, and I felt like I was, I sat down and write like, okay, I'm locked in now. Like I'm in the cockpit.
Yeah.
This is the thing.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean,
yeah, so leaning on that and just continuing I want to get better. I feel like I have a lot of room to continue to get better.
I haven't read the book in its entirety, but in reading it in preparation for this interview, the writing actually made me want to read and finish the book
Mm.
because the writing was actually good, which I was more looking to glean insights from the premise of the book. Like I liked the concept and I thought that's worth reading it, but it was the writing itself that
Mm.
actually will draw me back to finish the book.
Thanks. I
So
appreciate
yeah,
that.
you can feel good about it.
Thanks. Yeah. I was the biggest fear I had in writing the book was that it would come across as saccharine. Like the book, it's called One Last Question Before You Go, right? Like cue the violin music, right? It's
Yeah.
interviewing your parents. Like, oh, it's just it's a premise that screams bad writing. I guess like it's like, oh, we're so emotional. But like, I hope to write it in a way that was funny, in a way that was just, it talks about, and explores human folly and
Yeah.
how all this stuff can go wrong, and how we're all just fumbling along, but we can do so by continuing to move in with a little bit more love, and
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Well, was it difficult to find a publisher, and are there expectations for the performance of the book? And, you know, ultimately, will that limit your future writing ambitions?
Phew.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, I'll tell you the story of where I love talking about this stuff, by the way, because I think that, there's the process of writing, but then there's also the business of writing that
yeah,
I've learned a lot about. So my day job is a copywriter. I have a little boutique creative agency. We do funny commercials for brands like Mudwater and that kind of thing. So that's how I paid my bills, and I'm incredibly grateful that I was able over these past few years to have a steady day job, and take the odd Patagonia trip here and there, which is, incredibly awesome. I'm still a part of that company. And then write the book on the side. So one recommendation from other writers, and I just wouldn't have been able to do it financially, is like, don't quit your day job to write the book, because your create the pressure will be so great for it to be a financial success that you won't actually produce your best creative work. So I was really happy that my days looked something like, wake up early, go for a surf, come back, write for 2 hours, then turn on email, Slack, work for the rest of the day on my day job, do it all over the next day. But there was enough days in a row where I would take those 1 2 hour writing sessions in the morning that I was feeling and seeing progress in the book. Going back to Steve Hawk and Pam, they were really like my coaches through the whole process. Pam set up a Google Sheets document where I would have various deadlines for various chapters. So we would hit certain benchmarks by certain dates. Uh, Lots of writing sessions. I would go in and just be like, okay, I'm going to write this one scene today. Great. And to just focus on the smallest possible decision I could make that day then boom, move to the next thing. Internet's off, phone's off, just focus on that one thing for an hour, starting to make progress forward. By the end of the writing process, I was like, it took me 2 years to write it. I had not sought out an agent or really thought about the commercial viability of the book until that point. And it was a recommendation that I'd heard Tim Ferriss talk about, where he said, like, don't think about marketing the book or any of that until it's done. Chances are, unless you have a really big, like a massive following, you're not going to get an advance for a first book, which for people who don't understand publishing, I didn't, there are about five, they're called the big five. It's like Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Little Brown, and I can't think of the two others, but like they're all New York based publishing houses that produce and publish many of the books that are in bookstores right now. And what they'll do is give you an advance, whether it's, 100 grand, 200 grand. If you're Matthew McConaughey, it's probably a few $1 million to go write the book. And then when it's published, you pay back that advance. So every book that's sold initially after release, you're not actually making money on until you pay back that advance. And then you make a certain percentage on each sale. One thing that I was told can really sink writers' careers is if they get too big in advance on their first book, because if you don't pay back that advance, it's seen as a failure, right, for the publishing house. And the way publishing houses operate, it's actually similar to like a VC funds, where like they'll invest in hundreds of companies and it'll be one that turns into Uber, right? So it's one that turns into fucking Harry Potter, or Red Rising, or like, these massive successes. Most books fail. So what I did, right? So once I finished the book, I'm like, okay, well, I need an agent, because you can't actually go to a publishing house without they just won't return your email. So I went on a website called Publishers Marketplace. It's like a $20 a month subscription. And it's all of the names and contacts of agents around the world, like real legit agents. And one of the first ones, I emailed, his name's John Meals, works for Di Fiore Agency. It's a mid-sized agency in New York. They do like Humans of New York was a big book that they did, Slow Productivity, Cal Fussman. And he was psyched. He's like, you're a good writer. Let's fucking do this. I flew out to New York. He bought me drinks. I was like, I'm doing it. I'm a real writer. This is so awesome. It's just, catapulting forward. He sends out, it's basically a pitch where it's the first few chapters of your book, along with, hey, this is what the whole thing's about. This is going to be the audience, yada, yada, yada. He sends it out to publishers. Pretty much every single one was like, we really like this guy's writing, and this book is too much of both a memoir and how-to, and we need it to fit in our little like one or the other. And John like came back to me. He's like, look, you can either rewrite this whole book, or you can self-publish and we can move on to the next pitch. I had around that time been talking to Adam Skolnick, and when he wrote David Goggins' book, decided to self-publish with it's technically self-published, called Scribe Media, where you pay up front for them to give you editors, very professional editors, very professional. The woman who designed my book cover designed Stephen King books. But the model with Scribe is that you pay up front and then you own the book completely on the back end. Now, for a long time, Scribe or self-publishing was just this dirty word because you wouldn't get into bookstores. It was seen as unprofessional. Goggins and Adam went through Scribe and self-published. They sold 7 million fucking copies. It's the largest self-published book in history. And they made way more money through that model because they're getting, $10 every book instead of $4 a book. For the last 100 years, traditional publishers really had like a stranglehold on the market because people would go into bookstores and the big five would, you basically couldn't get your book in there unless you were published through them. Now, where does everyone buy books? Amazon, right? So it really has opened up this new opportunity for writers to potentially make more money on their work, get it out there themselves, and not need to deal with big publishers or take on any of that investment up front. So that's what I did. I've dipped into my savings to publish this book. I'm really happy with how it came out. And yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to go for Scribe, they can email me, Thiermann@substack.com, and I'd be happy to introduce them. But yeah, I think it's an exciting moment for writers to open up, potentially going a non-traditional route.
So where will the book be available?
Amazon.com, baby. You type in
Okay.
one last question before you go to Amazon. I'm also doing a Patagonia store tour. So it will be available in many Patagonia stores. Those guys are so fucking cool, man. I know that Patagonia has a good reputation, but and they sponsor me and all, so maybe you don't want to believe me, but that company and the people inside it are so fucking cool. Like, oh, Kyle, you're publishing your first book? Yeah, we really want to support. Let's do a store tour. Let's get it in the. I'm like, dude, thank you so much. It's so valuable having
Good.
these guys on my side right now. So yeah, we're November 18th, we're gonna do the opening one at Mudwater in LA. Then November 19th, we're gonna be in Cardiff. The 20th, we're gonna be in Ventura. 25th, we're gonna be in Santa Cruz at the Patagonia. These are all Patagonia stores. Then we're going to Austin, Portland, and New York.
Will they have it on their website too?
I don't know. I
Okay.
think I hope so.
Okay.
But yeah,
Awesome. Congrats, man.
thanks.
Um, Shifting into kind of closing or wrap up questions. Do you have a favorite joke from your stand-up routine?
Oh my God, you got your diving into this world.
No,
Uh,
just one question from it. We don't have to do a deep dive. But if you don't have a favorite joke, that's okay too.
My favorite joke was this one always got a laugh. I'd say I have this friend who's in an open relationship. Have you heard about this? It's where you break up, but in slow motion. I had a surf one was uh, I told my mom I was gonna go surf Mavericks, and she said, "Be safe." I told her I was gonna come here and do stand up tonight, and she said, "You're so brave."
Solid.
Yeah, I got a couple jokes. I think you know, part of my desire and thing I try and remind myself of is like you don't need to be good at your hobbies. Like you don't need to try and go pro at whatever it is that you start. And the whole optimization thing that like what social media makes you believe that you shouldn't even try if you're not going to take it really far, I think is wrong, and I think it flattens our lives. And it's hard for me because I tend to be pretty hard on myself. I try and go, I am ambitious. I try and get as good as I can at whatever it is I focus on. But like my girlfriend and I just signed up for salsa lessons that we're going to start taking. Like it's okay to suck at shit and fumble through new hobbies.
Yeah.
And it really is it's the only way that you can eventually get good at things. No. So
Are the salsa lessons for the wedding?
they are, yeah, I know. I called her my girlfriend. She's my fiance. She's my fiance, everyone. We haven't set a date for the wedding, but yeah, this last year I took her on a hike in Big Sur. We went to some hot springs about 10 miles in. Sun was going down. We were in the river. No one else was around. We stripped down butt naked, washed off the hike in the river, had the ring hidden, dropped down on one knee, butt naked, proposed. She said yes. Had planned this big party the next day at my brother's house in Santa Cruz, where all of her friends from around the country flew in. She had no idea what was going on. It was a pretty good time.
Well, I've never admitted this to anybody either, but now you and I have something in common, and it is proposing naked.
No way. Shut up. You need to tell me the story.
Not on air.
Okay. It's enough.
This is an
We're
interview.
bonded,
This
bonded through
is
nudity.
exactly. This is me interviewing you, not the other way
Yeah.
around. So we could save that. But
Yeah.
yeah, little known fact. Well, congrats.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thanks
Uh,
for the thoughtful interview, man. You're very
of
good at
course.
this.
No, of course. Tell me about Sundays are for the girls.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I was just down in mainland Mex down at Barra de la Cruz, and I learned about a very fun new policy that the locals had instituted at Barra, which is, I believe it's Sundays from 10 to 12 are girls only sessions out at the point, which I had never heard of happening anywhere else
Me neither.
uh, in the world. And Barra is it's an interesting story of coastal development because in I think was it 2006, could be getting that wrong. They did the Rip Curl Search contest that Andy won. It blew up. Holy shit! You know, it was as good as Barra gets. The whole world was like, "Oh my god, we need to go here!" Huge flood of tourism, and then the bar got bad for a number of years, and the local community rallied around some very thoughtful decision making to create laws that would behoove the place for years to come. So, you know, if you're a non-local, you can't own property in Barra. Uh, if you're going to drive down that dirt road, you need to pay, I think it's 100 pesos to a local who then distributes that money to local municipalities. And it's kept the place fairly intact for having the burning spotlight of global surf media on it for so long. I think that it's a real success story of locals being steadfast in how they want to develop their town. So I wrote a story for Surfer Magazine. I think it's called Sundays Are for the Girls about what's happening down in Barra.
You said from noon to 2 is their window?
I think it's from 10 to 12.
10 to 12. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, that detail alone, everything else, the context is all
Mm,
very interesting too, but that detail alone is nobody's aware of. I had never heard of that before.
yeah.
And it's a
And
model.
it's a very crowded wave, right? Like it's
Yeah, totally.
bar is not history. Bar is packed. So to have a little reprieve from aggressive dudes for 2 hours in the morning, I thought was you know, it's cool that it's locally run, right? Like
Well,
that it came from the inside and that they made that decision on their own.
agreed. I just don't understand how they enforce it or how nobody has tried to break the rules yet.
Or yeah, they play what was it, Noah Johnson, where he put a wig on and a bathing suit to go out and Blue Crush. Oh no, the locals they'll hoot you out of the water if you're a dude and you are still trying to surf during that time. They'll snap on you, and they have some pretty serious locals down there that will enforce it when
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah. It's good to see. Um, how long can you currently hold your breath?
Dude, I just did the Big Wave Risk Assessment Group course that Greg Long is running these days. Those guys have it running like a top. It's a 2 day long course. You are immersed in every second of it. I didn't feel like there was a minute wasted from the in class work to then down on the beach, learning how to C-spine people, learning how to give CPR and on surfboards, like putting surfboards together if you're out in a kind of crisscross fashion, give CPR, how to pull a drowning victim out. If you only have a shortboard, this was a crazy skill that I had no idea how to do. People should take the course, but you essentially wrap the back of your legs around their arms and their head is then up and you're paddling in on a shortboard, hooking their arms to your legs, dragging them in. Most people would try and throw the victim on top of the surfboard, but I mean, these guys have lifeguards, firemen, a number of people will come in and do guest lectures, but highly recommend if not even just for big wave surfers, but anyone who wants to become an asset more than a liability in the water, go take the big wave risk assessment course. During the course, they do a breath hold, and I held my breath for 4.5 minutes.
Do
Second,
you
second most of the class, and there was this like 50-something-year-old dude who was just a Jedi who held his breath for like 5.5 minutes.
wow, beat you by a minute.
I know, it was crazy.
Do you remember or can you guess the date that I first interviewed you or the year?
You probably first interviewed me, what, back in 2017?
Close. 16.
Okay. 2016.
October 2016. And do you know how long you could hold your breath then?
Ooh, probably 5 minutes.
No, it was actually 4 minutes at the time.
4 minutes? I'm beating it by,
So
by
you've
30
improved.
seconds. Yeah, beat it by 30 seconds. Yeah, you take someone out into the ocean and it's like, I probably hold my breath for like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But it's a
Um,
good little like ego. It's fun holding your breath in a safe environment, especially not underwater, just to get more comfortable with the diaphragm spasm
yeah.
and practice that a little bit.
What is your current fitness regimen?
My current fitness regimen is I wake up pretty early. First thing I do is if I'm not going to go surf, I will uh, go into my garage, which is a probably like a 10 by 15 car garage that I have cleared out. It has a rower, pull up bar, kettlebells, and jump rope. I recently asked ChatGPT to give me a 7 day a week workout regimen. Each workout takes about 30 minutes. And I told GPT, uh, this is all the equipment that I have in my gym. And it gave me all, and I said specific for big wave surfing. So it's like strength, mobility, cardio, and every day I have a workout that I have written into a small notebook that fits in your pocket. So I don't need my phone. I don't need like a computer to tell me the workout because often I find that if I wake up and I'm like, I want to do a workout, I don't want to have to think about what I'm going to do that day.
Mm,
So I have all these workouts written in a small notebook. Again, they're not crazy. They take like 30 minutes, but they uh doing a bit of weightlifting, like I'm not a big guy, but doing a bit of weightlifting and swinging a kettlebell around has helped me feel a lot stronger, especially if there are weeks that I'm going to go where I'm not surfing every day. I think that helps me maintain my fitness.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, Dietary wise, is there anything that you avoid
Alcohol. Yeah, I
completely?
don't. I did during COVID a 1 year no beer challenge where it's like it's a challenge where you write a check for a sum of money that would hurt to lose to a charity that you hate. I think that mine was to this like plastic pollution advocacy group. They basically go in on the municipal level and will make plastic bag bans illegal. They're called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and I wrote $1,000 check to ALEC and said if I drink alcohol during this year, I have to send a check to ALEC. So I did that year during COVID just because I didn't, none of us knew what that virus was, and I was like, drinking lessens my immune system, often just makes me feel a bit more lethargic. And I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to cut the decision out, right? Like that's for me, oftentimes, if someone's like, hey, you want a beer? Or it's the end of a long day and the beer is just there, I need to make the choice. Like, do I want a beer right now? Do I not? But having that $1,000 check on your corkboard makes you be like, well, there's no fucking chance I'm going to have a beer right now. So I really just kept that habit up afterwards. And now I'll have a beer every now and again, but I just feel like, yeah, alcohol is not the drug for me. it really zaps my energy levels, makes me feel less fit. And this year, like I I want to surf bigger waves for a long time. Like I think that there's um there's guys like fucking Kai Lenny and Chumbo and guys who are just like all year long surfing crazy big waves, which is on such another level um to just be on that cadence of it. Well, like I remember I interviewed Greg once and I was like, what was it like when you were in your prime, just traveling around the world all year long, surfing big waves, going from dungeons to Mavs to Jaws? Like he and Twiggy were on such a crazy cadence. And he looked up, he's like, you get pretty comfortable. Like, yeah, you would get really comfortable surfing fucking massive waves if you're doing it on that level. I'm not that guy, but I love getting amongst it every now and again. And just also, it doesn't necessarily even need to be a big wave, but just like wanting to perform well in, going down to Mex and getting barreled, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It takes a certain level, I find, of physical fitness to be able to, cool, swell's coming. I want to be able to do this. Let's go. So that's been my goal, with my fitness is just to be, can I say yes to the surf trip if it comes up tomorrow? And I orient my fitness goals around that.
What brands are supporting you other than Patagonia in those endeavors?
Uh Patagonia is the main one. Yeah,
Cool.
Patagonia. I've been sponsored by them for like 14 years now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What surf media do you follow nowadays?
I follow I follow I think Stab comes out with great stuff. I think that their How Servers Get Paid series is brilliant, and they have a real finger on the pulse of both core surf culture and really interesting stories. Like what they come out with is neither cheesy nor stupid, and I'm a really big fan of Stab these days. I think Surfer Magazine is doing some really interesting things right now where they're broadening the um, aperture on the stories they're willing to cover because it's no longer a print magazine. They have a bit more opportunity to shake things up. And, like Sundays are for the girls, right? Like it's a surf adjacent story. They recently covered a guy named David Litt who wrote It's Only Drowning. He was Obama's speechwriter who then learned how to surf, and it's a really great kind of memoir-esque book about um, gaining this new relationship with his brother-in-law and learning how to surf. And Surfer covered it. I think they had him write a story for it, and like I appreciate that they're willing to shake things up and go a little bit wider for all these stories that that Stab might not necessarily cover, but are still really interesting. And then I have a few of my first stories ever coming out in the Surfer's Journal in the next couple months, which I'm really proud and excited about. But I think that Surfer's Journal is like they're like the New Yorker of surfing, right? Like it's just the writing is always so good. The stories are so thorough and they never, in my experience, even just starting to write for them, like they don't rush stories. They're really, they're not trying to get there first. They're trying to do it best. And I think that we desperately need a media source that is not trying to be immediate. They're trying to go deep and have the story really endure. I think that's one thing that Surfer's Journal does really well is they try and have a lot of their stories be written in such a way that they're evergreen. And you could go back, 4 or 5 years and the story would still be relevant because they framed it up that way.
Entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're on the cutting edge. Like they're um cultivating stories of people I haven't even heard about in the surf world, but they're like
Mhm.
important, meaningful stories.
Yep.
So they've got enough fingers out there that they're constantly tapping into fresh content all the time. That's always high quality.
Yeah. And also they, I think, have a unique reverence for the past and pulling in voices from the 1950s, 1960s. A lot of the stories that you see them write will um, have a real head nod to an era prior, even if it's about a current issue. And I think that that tends to make the stories feel more resonant and like there's more
Yeah,
depth to them. You know, it's not just about what's happening now, it's all of this stuff that came before you as well.
totally. Um, Two-parter. Whose boards are you riding, and what was the last surfboard that you rode?
I like it. I'm riding a mix of Route One boards. Uh, Fucking, they make sick boards. Shout out Bobby and Malachi. They make really good short boards, and I tend to ride those on like any given day. You know, whether it be a 5.8, 5.11. Get a lot of my short boards there, and then I will get other boards from Fletcher Chenard. And I recently got my first Fletcher Chenard twin fin, first twin fin I've ever ridden in my life, and
Really?
surfed the last dude, I know it's crazy, right? Just never was able to get my hands on a twinny. Rode the last swell, that hurricane swell out at Malibu, a few days in a row on the twinny, and was having a ton of fun on an FCD. And then all my big wave boards are shaped by Travis Reynolds. Yeah, from the very beginning, and, you know, I was housemates with Tyler Fox, who's very underrated Mavs surfer, and he's been in the contest a number of times. I think maybe the best goofy footer to consistently surf Mavs over years. And yeah, he was my housemate when I was in my early 20s, and he gave me, you know, let me use one of his Travis Reynolds boards, which was my first big wave board. And then from there, I was just like, man, this thing works sick. And all my other ones have been shaped by T Reynolds.
Do you ride those? Are those quads? Or what fin
No,
setup do
they're
you use on the big
thrusters.
wave?
Yeah, they're thrusters. I have a few quads, and I like riding quads more in tubes. I think that like if you're going for like a 7.6 Puerto board or something like that, I would prefer that as a quad because I think it can give you more speed through the barrel. Just regular size dimensions, but I found there were a couple boards I had that were actually another. I write a lot of different boards, but Kalu Kaleta has shaped a lot of my like Puerto style boards, and he'll shape them with a 5 fin setup. So I had the chance to ride it as ride them as thrusters and then ride them as quads, and I found that there's more speed in a barrel with quads. Um, but yeah, surfing like my big wave boards are like 9.2 usually. I have a 9.6 as well. Anything beyond that, I think is just a little too much board for me. Um, and I like those. Yeah, for whatever reason, I think it's easier when you're going down the face on a thruster to just kind of pivot a little bit more on your rail. I ride really stiff, small fins out there. Um, but yeah, it's and the noses aren't too thick on my boards. I think that makes a really big difference. There was a couple of years there where I had like more beaked noses on my big wave boards, and I was fucking purling a lot, and I was like,
Hmm.
this is not good. Um I need to lighten up the nose a little bit. And so now the noses are a little thinner. They have a little bit more rocker. And like it with those waves, there's a real scoop in the takeoff. So you need to have enough board that can kind of make it through that scoop. But now I've got a yellow 9.2 that I've written for like fucking last like 6 years, and it works great. Go to
Wow.
board.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this.
Totally. I appreciate it. And you're a super fantastic interviewer, man. It makes me it's fun to uh just dive into areas that I had not thought about and feel like you're always one step ahead.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate the compliment.
Yeah, man.
Serve Splendor.